Hello. Hallo. Yeah. Hello. Hello, everyone. My name is Nina Dieters. I'm the head of program at Studium Generale. That's my job. Cool job, I can tell you. Tonight is the third and final lecture in a series about work that we did this January. But actually, it was supposed to happen last year in May, and I was thinking on my way here, what was my idea for this lecture and why did it come up? It actually originated during the Corona pandemic. I recall sitting around in my house behind my laptop, feeling very useless and purposeless, and remembering that in the news during lockdown, other types of jobs were framed as necessary and urgent. So people who were working in hospitals or in supermarkets or as a truck drivers. All of a sudden I was thinking, well, what does it mean to have a job? And all these existential questions came along, and I thought, well, that's a good topic for a Studium Generale lecture. And now we are here. This is the third lecture in a row. Tonight we will dive into this deeper question about finding meaning in your job, and the best person to ask this is Jelle Wiering. He's a postdoctoral researcher here at the University of Groningen. He knows all about, he's an anthropologist, and the great thing about being an anthropologist is that you get to immerse yourself in a group of people, look around, see what they do, how they behave, and what lessons you can take from these types of people. So in this case, he thought, well, finding meaning in work, what is the best place to research this? And he thought, well, a donkey shelter. And that's what he did, or what he is doing for part of his research, basically. So the next hour, he will give a lecture about his practice, the things he learned in the donkey shelter, and, well, what he can teach you about that, basically. And after that, you will have room to pose any question you like. So for now, the floor is yours. Jelle.
Test. Yeah. It's working. Yeah, it's working. Can we maybe dim the lights a bit, please? So I'm going to read a story, so it makes more sense if it's a bit dark. You can do that? Or you can do that? Oh, sorry. I thought, oh, never mind. I thought the person in the back would do that. I can do that. Let me see. That's even better. But how? Oh, movie. Yes, perfect.
This is better?
Yeah. Okay. Good morning, Paul, the manager of the day, says, as he sees me entering the canteen. Morning, I respond, while I'm quickly scanning the group of donkey caretaking sitting in the canteen. There are about 8 of them, and they are discussing random coffee break material. The canteen is a provisory building that features a large table surrounded by chairs. Every morning, the donkey caretakers gather at this table to drink coffee or tea for half an hour and get ready for their work. It's only my second day at the donkey shelter, and I am very excited. I like animals, but I never really work with them, so my ethnographic research here is a wonderful new chapter. I'm also a bit anxious because most of the people probably know how to take care of donkeys. I do not have the slightest idea. The anthropologist in me is very busy. I'm scanning everything and everyone, and I'm fully determined to show these people that, despite my lack of animal skills, I'm still useful to the shelter. We head outside and we start cleaning the area, and I soon learn that cleaning donkey droppings is going to constitute a major part of my responsibilities here at the shelter. So, not really working with these animals themselves, but rather with what they happen to produce. So what you do is you take a so-called shit boy, which is something like a dustpan with a long brush, but then specified for donkey droppings. You take this type of equipment and you start to scan the terrain for donkey droppings. And if you spot some, which is not so difficult to be honest, you get over there and remove them by using your equipment, the shit boy. Then you drop them in the wheelbarrow. This is the nice sound that should have been there from the start. You drop them in the wheelbarrow. Just see the wheelbarrow. It's the wheelbarrow. There you drop them. Let's get back to the sound. You've been working very hard, Jelle, Paul says about half an hour later. He points at my wheelbarrow, which is at that point really pushing the limits of how many donkey droppings a wheelbarrow can handle. I will show you what to do next, Paul continues with a smile. I have no idea what is coming, but given Paul's excitement, I suppose it's going to be a typical thing that newcomers have to experience. He heads toward a large container and he pulls the cover that lies atop of it away. I see a huge pile of shit and I take a step back. Paul clearly anticipated my disgust and he's visibly enjoying it. Now, what you want to do, Jelle, is to make some speed and drive your wheelbarrow toward the end of the container, to make sure that we're using all the space in the container that we're paying for. I do as I'm told, and I manage to do the job, so I cannot help but feeling a bit proud whilst walking back down the mountain of shit. Haha! You thought that was worse? Wait for it, Paul says. More wheelbarrows need emptying today, so what we're going to do now is make sure that the shit is more compact. We will do so by jumping on it. He smiles and again climbs the pile of shit. Standing atop of the mountain of utter grossness, he looks at me and he says, just to be sure, Jelle, if it's going to be too much, don't feel embarrassed. Just get out of the container as soon as you can. Most people can't stand it. Now it's my time to smile, because I'm pretty sure I'm going to be all right. Full of way too ambitious anthropologist confidence, I join him on the mountain of shit. Paul starts to count. 3, 2, 1, and the two of us jump. My 82 kilograms, together with Paul's considerably larger body weight, land together on the brown pile of donkey droppings. Our feet sink through the surface of shit, and the first thing I sense is not so much the smell, but a white kind of vapor that emerges from the pile that we just jumped on. It is warm. Suddenly, the smell enters my system, and somehow, it feels as if my lungs are collapsing. There's no thinking on my part whatsoever. All of a sudden, I just happen to find myself back on the square in front of the canteen, coughing and dying for some fresh air. Never have I smelled, if that is the term, anything so gross. Paul suddenly appears next to me and he's laughing out loud. Proudly he says, I don't mind jumping on it, you know. I'm actually kind of enjoying it. And we have one guy over here who really actually loves doing it. Welcome, everyone, to this talk on meaningful work on a donkey shelter. I hope to have given you some kind of introduction of what we're going to do today, what we're going to touch upon today. The light should be, sorry, yeah. What I try to do today is convey a story that has both ethnographic detail, ethnographic accounts, ethnographic stories, and theory, which is kind of the job that the anthropologists always have to do, right? You have to combine theory with ethnographic findings, and you have to make sure that whatever you're talking about also has theoretical relevance and the other way around. So what we're going to start with is bullshit jobs. As promised also in the text that I sent in preparation for this talk, bullshit jobs are a key feature of contemporary societies, and it is also a problem. So what is a bullshit job? A bullshit job, according to David Graeber, who is an anthropologist too, he passed away a while ago, not a couple of years. And he said, these are jobs that are so completely pointless that even the person who has to perform it every day cannot convince themselves there's a good reason to be doing it. There are many, he wrote a book about this, you can see it. It began actually with an essay, but later he also wrote a book about it. And there's many, many hilarious examples that he gave, but one I want to read out loud again. It's not very long, but it's very, I would say, it says a lot about what a bullshit job is. There we go. The German military has a subcontractor that does their IT work. The IT firm has a subcontractor that does their logistics. The logistic firm has a subcontractor that does their personnel management, and I work for that company. Let's say Soldier A moves to an office 2 rooms further down the hall. Instead of just moving his computer over there, he has to fill out a form. The IT subcontractor will get the form, people will read it and approve it and forward it to the logistic firm. The logistic firm will then have to approve the moving down the hall and will request personnel from us. The office people in my company will do whatever they can do, and now I come in. I get an email, be at barracks B at time C. Usually these barracks are 100 to 500 kilometers away from me, so I will get a rental car. I take the rental car, drive to the barracks, let dispatch know that I arrived, fill out a form, unhook the computer, load the computer into a box, seal the box, have a guy from logistic firm carry the box to the next room where I unseal the box, fill out another form, hook up the computer, call to dispatch to tell them how long I took, get a couple of signatures, take my rental car back home, send a dispatch a letter with all of the paperwork, and then I get paid. So, instead of the soldier carrying his computer just 5 meters away, 2 people drive for a combined 6 to 10 hours, fill out around 15 pages of paperwork, and waste a good 400 euros of taxpayers' money. This is a perfect example of a bullshit job, right? It's the kind of work that really shouldn't actually exist, we could say. There's no purpose in a way. It's just to keep people busy. His essay and later his book, it was very provocative and it sparked a lot of discussion because more and more people began to realize that at least part of the jobs is indeed a bit bullshit. It does not contribute a lot to society or any kind of larger purpose. In fact, the book was the result of him posting the question online on several different online platforms. Like he asked, do you think you have a bullshit job? And come up with examples. And there were more and more people, also in the Netherlands actually. This survey was also conducted in the Netherlands. And a lot of people responded and, then he realized this is even larger than I initially thought. There are some important critical thoughts you can raise here, right? So if someone themselves consider their job not to be, not to have any function, is that enough, right? And if it is true that there is a famous anthropologist who posts online a question, okay, is there anyone who experiences themselves to have a bullshit job? You can imagine that there's people going to respond to that, right? It's kind of appealing to respond to a researcher calling out for such responses, right? Because maybe you're going to be in the book, right? Maybe your story is going to be in it. So in terms of academic methodology, you can raise some questions here, like, okay. And I point this out because we read a lot about bullshit jobs, also in more popular discourses, and these kind of questions, like how was the research actually conducted, these are not often posed, and I find that important. So, before we delve into theoretical consideration, I would like to challenge you to look around and discuss with the person or persons sitting next to you. I trust this is going to work out spontaneously. Do you consider your work bullshit? And does the other person or persons share this conviction about your work? And what would be the opposite of a bullshit job? I'll give you 5 minutes to do this. Okay. We do not have a lot of time. So what I'm gonna do, I would like to know what the opposite of a bullshit job looks like. Does any one of you have a very good idea what the opposite, so point 3, what the opposite of a bullshit job looks like? Anyone wants to have the dice in order to give a response? Or was it too short to get to point 3? I can imagine that actually. Yeah, it was too short, right? Yeah. Ooh, that's in the back. That's challenging. I'm gonna run. I'm better at running than throwing, I guess. Yes, hope it works. Otherwise I will repeat you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So we the 3 of us came to the conclusion that in order for a job to not be bullshit, it should positively impact people's lives, society, but in a positive way.
Okay. And a clear-cut example, like a profession or a job?
For example, as a medical student, you save lives. But if you work for a non-ethical company, then it's the opposite.
Aha. Great. Thanks. Okay, so the opposite of a bullshit job, rather than further exploring all kinds of bullshit jobs that are out there and focusing on their differences. There's all kinds of typologies of what the different kinds of bullshit jobs are there, right? I decided to focus on the opposite. So I tried to find a research job, or a bullshit job, the opposite of a bullshit job. Also conceptually, right? So we can also always think about jobs that are meaningful, but what would be the ideal kind of bullshit job? Opposite of a bullshit job. So theoretically, this brings us to the field of meaningful work. Meaningful work is a rather recent field, actually, and it's getting more and more people working in there, also from various disciplines, right? You can imagine there's people from philosophy, right, who spend a lot of time thinking about, okay, what's the opposite of a bullshit job? But there's also people from organizational studies, right, who are more eager to learn about, okay, how can we make sure that our organization is more engaged with the things that actually matter to the people working at our organization, right? So you get this interdisciplinary conversation there, which makes the field of meaningful work very interesting. But it also touches upon a very crucial issue, like what is work anyway, right? What does count as work? And why? Particularly why is important, right? We tend to think of work as stuff that is paid, right? Or salaried, something like that. But what about the many kinds of work that are out there and that are being done, or that is being done without being paid, right? Here, gender comes in as well. A lot of studies show that typically at home, women tend to do a lot more things than men do, or at least they take management over those kind of things, but that's unpaid. But yeah, you could say it's work. And what about voluntary work, right? Or grandparents who take care of children when the parents need to go to work. All those kind of things, they mesh with these kind of categories that we have. Yet, if we think about meaningful work, so the opposite of a bullshit job perhaps, this kind of image comes to mind, right? So helping others, helping society, doing something good. And there's many different scholars working on how to achieve this. And this is one of the big names in the field, Marjolein Lips-Wiersma. She's originally from the Netherlands, but she lives in New Zealand now. And she, amongst many scholars, have conducted a lot of research on what it is that, what for people makes their job very valuable or important. And she comes with a lot of, this is the map of meaning, so this is something she produced on the basis of a lot of research. I cannot go into it very detailed now, but you can see that the meaning in work is itself very complicated, because it's you can derive meaning in your work because you are developing yourself, but you can also experience meaning because you can see that others are benefiting from your kind of contributions, right? So it's not very easy to easily come up with, okay, this is what makes work meaningful or not. There's also a very important difference between meaning and meaningfulness, which gets even more complicated if you want to translate it into Dutch. But meaning relates basically to any kind of interpretation, any kind of meaning, whereas meaningfulness is about experiences or meaning in a positive way. Right? So they are full of meaning, which tend to have positive associations. This is a focus on the meaning in work, so it's rather focused on the individual perspective, right? So we all have a kind of idea how we can find meaning in our work. But that's just a part of the story. There's also the meaning at work. So meaning at work is different. That's more related to the culture of an organization. Right? So how do people at work experience meaning, and how does that relate to your own individual interpretation? What do you think is important, and what do your colleagues? Well, this is a very important, a very disturbing study actually of an ethnographer who found herself in a company where the body was clearly marginalized. So the idea was you need to work very hard, make many hours, and be as productive as you can, and kind of neglect your body in a way. You just need to sleep at the office occasionally, many hours, and it was this kind of culture where everyone was pushing each other to work even harder. The funny, or it's absolutely not funny, but the interesting thing I should say was that after 3 years, every one of those employees began to experience all kinds of troubles because they were neglecting their body so much. Another good example of the meaning in work, so the previous one, which I skipped, is a thesis written by Lena Hollisch, which is about the why of hunting. So she conducted research among hunters, and this is, of course, a very intriguing project to start with, right? Because hunters have this kind of profession that a lot of people in society look down upon, or they think, okay, why are hunters even there, right? Why do we need them? They shoot animals, that's not really good, so how can they actually experience meaning in that at all? Well, what she shows in her terrific thesis is that these hunters all have their own kind of system and their notion of nature where the practice of hunting fits perfectly. And in a way, they kind of argue that it is them who are doing the good thing, in a way, and society doesn't understand that, and it's kind of a mismatch. So the meaning in work, meaning at work, more the culture, and then there is the meaning of work. And the meaning of work relates to how society perceives work. We were just discussing during your assignment that the meaning of work has changed hugely. If you think back, previously a lot of people, they weren't even thinking about meaningfulness in their work. They were happy, in the Netherlands, they were happy they were having work at all, and they just did their job, and that's about it. Right? And in many countries over the globe, it's still the case, of course. So meaningfulness, or even thinking about the meaningfulness in work, is a privilege, of course. The meaning of work relates to how society considers work, right? What is a job considered important? Is working as such considered important? So it's a very different perspective on how you see meaning and work. This brings us to dirty work, which is an example of the meaning of work. So the first field we have discussed is meaningful work, and the second theoretical field I want to touch upon today is dirty work. And what we're going to see in the case of the donkey caretakers is that these two theoretical fields come together. So dirty work is the kind of work that gets marginalized by society. So it's the kind of work that society tries to look away from, prefers not to do. So here you can see the soldier. The profession of soldier has this kind of tainted image in the sense that it's being dangerous. And dirty work concerns the jobs that are dangerous. It concerns the work that is tainted in one way or another. There are three types. So there is socially tainted work. And this social taint refers to occupations that involve regular contact with stigmatized populations, such as prison guards, associations, or it concerns work with servile relationships built into the social structure. So you can think about the butler here, right? So typical clear-cut hierarchies. There's power. And this These kind of professions have this kind of social taint. And therefore, a lot of people in society prefer not to do it. A second category of dirty work concerns physically contained work. And this is the work that is dangerous. So think about the soldier, or think about these constructors sitting on a very high platform. Or it is physically contained because it is dirty, and dirty in the sense of being gross. Right? So there's no image here, but you can think of many typical types of professions that concern dirty work. Maybe the introduction that I read about the donkeys is also a very good example of work being very gross. And then finally, there's the third category of dirty work, and that is morally tainted work. So moral taint refers to occupations that are regarded by a significant portion of society to be sinful or of dubious virtue, such as erotic dancers or pawnbrokers, or in which deceptive or intrusive methods are commonly used. So, for example, telemarketers or repossessors. Right, so 3 types of dirty work. If you look at studies on dirty work, and there are a lot of ethnographies also written about dirty workers, so ethnographers who join the people doing the dirty work of society, there are a few observations that often come to the fore. So dirty workers tend to foreground the non-stigmatized features of their work. Right? So if you would focus on, for instance, cleaners, they would tend to focus on the kind of things that emerge because of them cleaning. Right? So they say, we make a lot of people happy because they have clean whatever offices or other places. So rather than focusing on the kind of stigmatized features, their work being gross, the cleaning is a gross process, they tend to focus on the non-stigmatized features. Another important finding is that their work is often considered dirty by society and not necessarily by themselves, which is very interesting. And they often develop a very strong occupational culture. So particularly for the morally tainted work, so think about the dubious casino owner or the dubious lawyer, they tend to, or the coffee shop owner, also a very good example, they tend to stick together. They tend to work to build bridges with colleagues, and these kind of relationships move beyond just a professional relationship. They tend to become friends as well. And often dirty workers are very proud on them doing society's dirty work. And here's the typical phrase, someone's got to do it, right? So why, I don't mind so much, let it be me. So I can propose my contribution to society. And here we can see the opposite of a bullshit job coming, right? In a way. So what I set out to do 1.5 years ago was finding out how meaningful work and dirty work relate. Right? So we've seen 2 theoretical fields. They are isolated. They are not brought into conversation very often. There's a few papers on this, but not a lot. And I think there is more to it. So I thought, okay, let's explore this at a donkey shelter and see how this plays out. So, the donkey shelter. I think it's good to also have a brief reflection on why the donkey shelter in the first place. I selected the donkey shelter because I noted, or I kind of hypothesized, that people do not work at the donkey shelter for financial incentives, right? So it would be interesting for debates about meaningful work. People don't go there for the money. So I thought, kind of hypothesis, that they would come there to get a sense of meaningfulness, amongst other reasons, of course, but that would be one of them. Another point is that it deviates from more regular kinds of organizations, which constitute the typical focus of inquiry in organizational studies. Of course, a donkey shelter is not the typical organization that one thinks of when someone speaks about organizations, right? And you can imagine that the field of organizational studies focuses on typical organizations, right? And how the productivity can rise and stuff like that. And they do not tend to focus on a donkey shelter. So it's also kind of provocative way, I would say, to conduct research. The donkey shelter also pushes one to think about work as such, and think also about the previous discussion, or the previous point that I pointed. What do we actually consider to be work? When does one consider work, and why, actually? The work at the donkey shelter also can arguably be considered socially dirty, physically dirty, and even morally dirty. So it would also be interesting for debates about dirty work. We'll get back to why those three boxes could actually be ticked. Okay, so this is the donkey shelter. Here you can see the entrance, you can see the nice trees, and you can see the terrace, or the place where visitors tend to come. It's not a very nice day that I took these pictures, but when it's nice weather and when there's sun, there's chairs all over there and tables so that visitors can sit there. And after they sit there for a while, they can move out and they can, let me see if I have a nice picture. No, I don't. Well, they can pet the donkeys. Here I'm doing it myself. But they can enter the field and they can look to the donkey. They can get at the donkeys, they can brush them and they can pet them. And they can have interactions with them. So who work at the donkey shelter? A variety of people. It makes it all the more interesting, I would say. Interns, volunteers, salaried workers, 4 of them, and people who, for all kinds of reasons, do not fit so well in salaried work. Well, this is also a very interesting phrase in itself. It's Dutch, I will translate it. It says, we do not pay our volunteers because they're unpayable. They are unaffordable. So, which is already, well, kind of a statement. Okay, the animals that it features. Every week there are other animals, and it never surprises me what they can collect. There's about 100 to 150 volunteers there, and they are very passionate about animals. So if any of those 150 people encounter an animal that's being treated poorly in the Netherlands, they will make a phone call, and usually the manager of this place says, yeah, bring the animal over. So we've had, almost any kind of animal that features in the Netherlands, we've had that on the shelter. And every week there would be, I've seen even tadpoles, so the baby frogs. I've seen cow. One day suddenly there was a cow. Usually we tend to only have donkeys, but then there was a cow. I've seen a pig. That's actually a male deer, so a forgot the translation, but a kind of mix between a horse and a donkey. And every week there's probably new animals. So it's always very fascinating, and it really captures the kind of chaotic atmosphere. Chaotic sounds very negative, but of course it's also very nice because there are not many rules, not many requirements. You can feel very free in a way. So the variety of animal really captures this kind of free spirit that's going on a donkey shelter. What it does, I think this is a clip. Yes. There you see the donkeys. You see, I'm not a professional cameraman, but you can see it captures a bit of what's going on, right? We feed the animals, we try to get them over there, and that's usually being conducted by the people who have a lot of skill with donkeys. So usually I'm not one of them. Usually I'm the one in the field looking for donkey droppings and cleaning the area. So my tasks, as I mentioned, a lot of different things. On the left you can see me and one of my friends there. We often send out to the woods where we can collect wood for the donkeys. Donkeys, I didn't know that, but apparently donkeys, they really dig this kind of food. So we gather that in the woods and then we get back, and we always have this game, who can get the most wood. So, well, it's very much fun. There on the picture on the right, I'm cleaning rubber ducks. I have no idea why they are there in the first place, but I was asked to clean them. Also captures this kind of spirit, right? That I hope you get a bit familiar with now. It really is the culture of the donkey farm, donkey shelter. This is the holiday address. The fence was repaired by me, which is a miracle because I really have 2 left hands. I'm really, really not good at that. But this is the place where they can go during the holidays. So then they're taking away from the shelter and they go to a very nice place with a lot more space. This is me taking a very ugly selfie with a donkey in the back of the car. So then we're moving the donkeys. And at top of the slide, don't miss it, is the coffee. And coffee is a crucial part of my task at the donkey shelter, because we spend, every Thursday I'm there from, let's say, 9 till 2, and I spend at least 1 hour drinking coffee with the other people there. So you can calculate, it's really a lot of time. Okay, before we proceed, because now I'm going to the content about meaningful work and dirty work at the donkey shelter, are there practical questions about the donkey shelter? Things that are maybe not clear or that I need to light up, that I need to enlighten before we continue? No? Okay. There we go again. I can try to get this, then I need to go a lot of slides back. Never mind, I wanted to get the sounds on again. But okay, the first story, it's called the story of the bankers, so the story of the bank employees. Together with 6 other donkey caretakers, I'm having coffee in the canteen. It is early in the morning and it's cold and rainy. We are discussing casual things in anticipation of Paul's instructions for today. I'm sitting next to Paul and I notice he's slightly nervous. Paul, who is aged 23, is today's manager, which means he's responsible for everything to run smoothly. Paul feeling a bit nervous is not a very special thing, however, as we often observe him feeling like that. Daniel, one of the other voluntary caretakers, and I are always making teasing jokes about his nervousness, as from our point of view, there's not really much reason to worry at the donkey shelter. Instead, many a time, our main challenge is to find enough duties to make it through the day. Paul then informs us that a group of bank employees will join us today to assist us with our cleaning duties. He tells us it will be a group of approximately 10 bank employees. This bank is known as a left-wing green bank, and Paul tells us that they make this visit every year to show their societal engagement. Though one at first might think this upcoming visit is something the donkey caretakers applaud and appreciate, I soon noticed that the donkey caretakers perceive it rather differently. One concrete problem with these bankers' upcoming visit is that it is a bit unclear what it is that these bankers are going to help us with. There is not a lot of work to do, which explains why Paul is not too excited about this group of enthusiastic people, all expecting a lot of donkey carrying to do. I decided to not engage with the issue, and I leave it up to Paul. Instead, I offer to start cleaning the visitor square. This task is not so popular as it implies one needs to manually broom all the leaves away from the square, which then instantly return because of the surrounding trees. Subsequently, one needs to get a water cooler and use it to mop the area. It's heavy work, but it feels satisfying to me because it's physically demanding and because most caretakers prefer to do something else, which means I feel useful. Paul, whose train of thought was interrupted by my suggestion, seems relieved that I actually came up with a task to do by myself. I start cleaning the outside area amidst the pouring rain. It's truly horrible weather, and soon I'm soaked in an amalgamation of sweat and water. A few minutes before the group of bank employees are expected to arrive, Paul joins me on the square and asks me to think of a few tasks for the group. Maybe I could supervise a few of them and let them clean one of the stables or something, take care of a few of them. I see some despair in Paul's eye and I promise him to do so, though it feels a bit odd as I have only been working there for a couple of months. At 11 o'clock, however, none of the bank employees has arrived. I'm still doing the heavy cleaning work, which is something I regret by now, as I'm not even halfway through and I feel exhausted already. At 11:10, one of the other donkey caretakers runs out to inform us that there's still no one. Finally, at 11:30, so half an hour later than agreed upon, 4 of the 10 promised bank employees arrive. I note they wear good-looking, neat clothing, which is very inconvenient for the dirty work at the shelter. The bank employees pass the square as fast as they can to reach the canteen to see cover before the rain and have a warm beverage. None of them greets me or even looks at me, which makes me angry. Paul, who is now accompanying me in the rain, says to me, "Look, if you do not want to work in the rain, just stay home and send us some money instead." What are they thinking? We've already had coffee. They're probably scared to get their fancy clothes dirty. Why are they even here? I notice that all the caretakers at the shelter appear angered or at least irritated. The group of bank employees clearly broke with the few unwritten rules of the shelter. They arrived too late, they were inappropriately dressed and hence unprepared, and they neglected the principle that one is willing to ignore personal convenience like being wet or cold to make sure that the animals are taken care of and the work gets done. End of the vignette. So the first interpretation of what's going on in this vignette would be from the perspective of I want to present would be from the perspective of the bank employees. A group of bank employees sought to show their commitment to the good cause by assisting a donkey shelter. Though I do not have concrete insight into what motivated this group, it makes sense to assume that they participated at the shelter because they wanted to do something meaningful. This bank did not just donate money like many other banks tend to do. They sent a group of committed people to join and to concretely assist. From the donkey caretaker's perspective, however, things look very differently. Even before one of the bank employees had even set foot in the shelter, the donkey caretakers were already slightly offended because these bank employees just assumed they could randomly come over and assist without any training. As Paul explained to me, look, we already have a lot of voluntary people here, just hanging around, and that's all nice and so, but what we really need is good people. People work hard, like you. Then we can actually get things done. I'm not so happy with all those people who just come over to pet donkeys or whatever they are doing. Why would I actually need 10 random bank employees? They have no idea about how things work here. And what's even worse, because of their presence, I can't do anything myself. It was during the afterward lunch that the mismatch between the donkey caretakers and the bank employees became even clearer. There was an unfriendly conversation going on where the donkey caretakers were calling the bankers tree huggers and anthroposophists. And the donkey caretakers associated this bank and its employees with Rudolf Steiner and anthroposophy, and they even derogatorily referred to him a couple of times. The bank employees, in turn, appeared offended by the donkey caretakers' behavior, and it appeared that they were trying to teach the donkey caretakers that they should actually be more thankful for their assistance. For example, upon being called a tree hugger, one of the bank employees began answering questions that he thought that should have been asked to him instead of the offensive tree hugger comment. He said, "Yes, I'm doing well, thanks for asking. Yes, I enjoyed helping you all out today." This reply clearly illustrates the bank employees' attempt to correct the donkey caretakers by teaching them how to behave more politely. There are rather different evaluations of work in this vignette that should be clear, I think. One can easily observe how the working activities in this brief account are considered meaningful from one point of view, but meaningless or perhaps even morally questionable from another. For the bank employees, this visit probably embodied a roll-up-your-sleeve attitude, as well as an ambition to have an actual impact on animal well-being. For the donkey caretakers, the visit was experienced as slightly insulting and perhaps even morally questionable act. Did this bank really want to help out, or was it part and parcel of a promotional campaign to promulgate its alleged green fingerprints? The fact that the bankers failed to adapt to the cultural standards of the donkey shelter seemed to convince most donkey caretakers that the latter was the case. Later that afternoon, an unhappy Paul asked me rhetorically, why didn't they simply send us some money? Which really captured his and others' overall frustration of the visit. Okay. Still there, everyone? Yeah? Okay, vignette 2, the dead donkey. Another story, yes? And after that I will explain why these stories are relevant, so please bear with me. Today, upon entering the canteen for the early morning coffee, I noticed an uncomfortable atmosphere in the canteen. Remember early morning coffee, half an hour, right? Everyone together. It's more quiet than usual and there are no usual jokes. Bart, the manager of the shelter, who lives in the house situated on the shelter's terrain, soon informs me that a donkey passed away that night. This happens quite often, because after all, the shelter takes care of old and unhealthy donkeys, so it makes sense, right? What is an issue, though, is that the body is still in the stable, with the truck that is coming over to dispose of it is soon arriving. This means that the donkey rapidly needs to be transferred from the stable to the street in the front of the shelter, which is a distance of about 100 meters. We are with a couple of people, but to my surprise, only 4 of us raise hands when asked for volunteers to move the donkey, the corpse. Daniel, a retired school manager, Paul, the day manager, Bart, the overall manager, and I, we head to the stable. I still do not know what kind of task I'm about to face, but drawing on the body language of the other 3, I anticipate a very difficult task. And it turns out that my worries are founded. While walking toward the stable, Bart informs us that the donkey is about 150 kilograms and that it's a total logistic disaster. The animal has turned cold and stiff overnight, Bart explains, and this makes the animal much, much heavier. Bart's strategy is to put the donkey in a wheelbarrow so that it can be moved more easily. This sounds like an excellent plan, but as Bart already warned, it turns out that the animal is very, very heavy. It is a task that seems barely doable with the 4 of us, and to make matters worse, soon after our first failed attempt to lift the corpse, blood begins to emerge all over the donkey corpse. Because of our clumsy and uncoordinated lifting, the donkey corpse takes all kinds of awkward and disturbing shapes. The 4 of us look at each other and as if to say that this is not the way an animal corpse should be transported. It should be done with the proper equipment, more people and much more discreetly. Bart repeats that we do not have a choice. It's just the way it is, folks. That truck is going to be here any minute, and if there's something for it to pick up, we will need to pay. And if there's nothing for it to pick up, we need to pay anyway. Then Bart suddenly stares at something behind me, and I turn around to have a look too. We note that a bunch of donkey caretakers are spectating, but to our frustration, none of them offers to assist. I look down and I see that my jeans is covered in some strange, thick, brown sort of substance, probably blood. We continue our efforts and finally, somehow, we manage to put the animal's head in the wheelbarrow. Slowly but steadily, we manage to put the rest of the body in it too. 2 legs do not fit, and they just hang there awkwardly. Yet the corpse is transportable now, and we quickly cross the distance toward the shelter entrance to put it on the ground and cover it with a blanket. Upon covering the corpse, the 4 of us again look at each other and we look relieved. We wait in slight, uncomfortable silence for someone to say something. It is clear that we managed to do something important and good, but in a very disputable way. Finally, Daniel breaks the silence and he says, "This was horrible, but there was simply no proper alternative. I'm happy I did not have to experience this while being alive." I look over my shoulder again and I see that 4 interns are observing us, and they appear disgusted. 4 interns. A first interpretation of this brief event is the one integrated in the vignette itself. It concerns the perspective of the 4 caretakers transporting the corpse. The carriers experienced the transportation of the corpse as a tough and utterly gross act, but also one that was crucial and hence important and meaningful. Someone simply had to do it. But much like the previous vignette, this vignette can also be interpreted rather differently. A week later, when I arrived at the shelter, Daniel soon told me that there had been some fierce discussion and some controversy a couple of days ago. It turned out that the interns witnessing the transportation of the corpse had been disgusted by our acts, even up to the point that they submitted an official complaint to the overall manager, Bart. The interns thought it had been a very unprofessional and disrespectful way to treat the animal. Unfortunately, I did not manage to speak to one of these interns myself, but Daniel and Bart told me that they had expressed their surprise about how unprofessional such things were conducted at the shelter. And during the fierce discussion, the interns had referred to their books and their teachers' lessons, and had even mentioned a long list of official procedures, protocols, and rules. The donkey that had passed away had been one of their favorites, and the way the corpse was disposed of had made them very, very angry. They considered the way we had moved the corpse as disrespectful to the animal and not appropriate for an authorized foundation. So again, this second vignette shows us how meaningfulness is rather subjective. These interns considered the whole event as totally unprofessional. And I very much agree with them, Daniel continued his report to me a week later. But what else could we have done? I think neither of us liked doing it, but yet, we had to. Daniel then smiled and continued. And you know what? Those interns don't even know that that same donkey was not even picked up that very day. Daniel's word here not only captured the early mentioned "someone has to do it" spirit that is typical for dirty workers. His final comment about the donkey corpse not being picked up also reflects an almost bragging notion of his capability to relativize the grossness of the decaying corpse and the situation as such. His words convey the idea that dirt should be something that one is capable of overcoming. Dirt is there, but it is only dirt, which should not get in the way of more important moralities and principles. Seen from this perspective that privilege is ideology over matter, one needs to be able to overcome their disgust to do the allegedly morally right thing. For Daniel, marginalizing the materiality of dirt followed by a corresponding way of treating dirt that illustrates that one is capable of privileging moralities and ideologies over matters. And that is what makes for Daniel this act very meaningful. Okay, enough ethnography. So if we look at the findings that are communicated, hopefully, by these vignettes, but also by the way that I told about the donkey shelters, there's a few things that I want to highlight here. First of all, the importance of drinking coffee together. It sounds very basic, but it's actually a very key feature, I would say, of creating meaningful work. Because what you get is that because people tend to speak with each other for like half an hour before you actually start to do things, you get to know each other. They know my children, for instance, much better than many people here at the university. Because we have so much time to just talk about random casual things that happen in our private lives. This also means that if you work with friends, or at least people who know you, which makes the work, at least, and this is of course a very subjective interpretation, but I noted that this makes a lot of difference if you want to enjoy your work or experience something meaningful in it. Another key feature was that the donkey shelter let everyone do what they're good at, or at least relatively speaking, because I'm not sure if I'm very good at anything there, but so this also implies that there's a higher chance of you getting, meaningful experiences or having the feeling that you contribute something because you're doing what you're good at. Another interesting thing is there's not so much to do at the donkey shelter, and that implies that if you happen to do something, it is kind of special already, right? It's a very strange thing, but it works like that. And some people are there for the donkeys, but there are also a lot of people who are there for their co-donkey caretakers. So one of the people I interviewed, she said, this is a shelter for donkeys, but I would actually argue it's also a shelter for people. Then there is the embodied satisfaction, which came to the fore when I discussed the cleaning the place, right? I'm used to university work, which is a lot of thinking and sitting down. And this is totally different. After a day at the donkey shelter, I'm exhausted, physically exhausted, but this gives a kind of satisfaction that you cannot get if you work in your head all the time. At least that's my experience. And then there is a theoretical contribution that I would like to call events of significance. And this is a key thing that I want to highlight in the final few minutes that I have here. So what are events of significance? Events of significance are events during which you experience meaningfulness, or meaning the lack of meaningfulness, or moral questionability, morele bevraagbaarheid, moral ambiguity, let's put it like that. So the key events of significance are those kind of moments that you tend to think about when someone asks you, is your work meaningful or not? We all have those kind of memories when you think back in your work at particular situations, particular events that gave us the feeling that, okay, what we're doing, it matters or it doesn't matter. Right? These are the kind of core memories related to the significance of our work. And the two vignettes that I read here are two examples of events of significance from my perspective. Two major things that happened during the 1.5 years that I was there, which really shed light on meaning and meaningfulness at the shelter. So these are events during which, and after which, and perhaps even before which, one experiences meaningfulness, meaninglessness, or even moral doubt in their work. Often these events are remembered rather well and constitute one of the first things one thinks about when asked about the meaningfulness of their work. For scholars, it's a conceptual tool to further explore the materiality of meaningful work. So what you can do is try to get back at those events of significance and see why that particular event became significant. So what were the typical practices that were going on? What was the kind of effect that people were having there? What were the kind of emotions that were prevailing there? Was there a fight? It is a very, very fruitful stepping stone, I would say, to further explore how we can get to feelings of meaningfulness. And think about it yourself. Can you even recall an event of significance in your work? Then the donkey droppings and dirty work. So the previous slide was about the contributions to the study of meaningful work. So what about dirty work? Well, I think we can agree that it's physically dirty, right? I do not have to give more findings for that, I guess. And occasionally it's also morally questionable. A lot of these animals are caged, after all, right? Okay, you can say the shelter takes care of these animals, but yet they are caged animals. And sometimes I have my questions in terms of whether it could have been done better. Or think about the corpse of the donkey, right? It wasn't moved in the most appropriate way. And then there are social hierarchies too that influence one experience. When you work there, a lot of visitors have more attention for the donkeys than they have for you. So there's really this kind of idea that the visitors, that they are there and you are just a cleaner in a way. So there is a hierarchy at stake, and I'm not even mentioning that there's interns who need to do all kinds of stuff in order to get their certificate. Of course, these are my evaluation, and hence they are not grounded in societal perspective. And this is different from how dirty work is treated in the literature. And also, all of these examples are not clear-cut example of dirty work, but rather of dirty work activities, right? If you look at, for instance, the profession of a cleaner, it involves much more engagement with dirt than working at the donkey shelter. And I think many people in the Netherlands would actually say that donkey shit is not really that gross. I mean, it's just animal stuff, right? It's not really dirty. Still, I would say this is an important contribution because there's dirty work in any profession. So I think it makes sense to also have a look at dirty work activities in all kinds of profession and not just at the clear-cut examples of dirty work. So think about your own profession. Is there dirty work? Are there lousy jobs that really no one likes to be doing? Right? Get coffee, stuff like that, right? So, in terms of theory, how do meaningful work and dirty work relate? Engaging with dirt is a badge of honor for many of the donkey caretakers. So they are taking pride in the fact that they are dealing with donkey droppings or dirt. Think about Paul who jumped on the container, right, and was kind of bragging that he could stand it. Someone's got to do it, and let it be me because I can handle it. It gets a badge of honor in a way. But dirt also provides a window to observe how workers consider meaningfulness. So, in conclusion, what strikes me the most of my work at the donkey shelter is how events of significance frequently feature dirtiness. Sometimes physical dirt, sometimes social dirt. And always the question of morality. How the dirt should be dealt with. And again, dirt in a very broad sense. At many occasions at the donkey shelter, the meaningfulness, the meaninglessness, or even the moral questionability, really that word is killing me. The moral ambiguity of an event of significance hinged upon a particular interpretation of how the dirt involved in that has been dealt with. Subsequently, the event is evaluated by workers in terms of whether the performed practices honor that specific interpretation of dirt. The question of work being meaningful, meaningless, or even morally ambiguous thus depends on the treatment of dirt and the worker's underlying interpretation of it. Dirt thus often functions as a tool of measurement, a gauge stick that renders insight into how colleagues conceive of meaningfulness. How to deal with death, different people, and animals, for example. Given that any organization and any job has dirty kind of activities, I think it is interesting to explore how this theory works for different occupations and people. Think about the dirty work in your work. So the work activities within your job that are a little devaluated. Get coffee for everyone, writing the minutes, putting everything in the dishwasher in the kitchen, stuff like that. Generalizing my finding from the donkey shelter, I would hypothesize that how workers conceive of the dirty activities in their profession and how they are to be conducted is often not discussed and therefore fosters below the surface. One way of getting interest there is of how these kind of things develop is through gossiping. Right? These things are not discussed, but they are discussed through gossiping. So the way workers conceive dirty activities in their professions and how they are to be conducted bears the potential to eventually initiate large clashes on the work floor. Right? So these agreements are of how dirty activities should be dealt with, how people should do it. Eventually they come out and they have the potential to create a large clash. It is at the same time a crucial and marginalized ingredient of an organizational culture. And fourth and finally, it provides original insight, also academic I would say, into how workers conceive of meaningfulness in and of their work. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Jelle. There's some room for questions if you want. I have one for starters. I don't know. It really made me think about, well, what if we just redefine work or get rid of it, the concepts in general, and just give everyone a basic income and see what you do with your day. How do you feel about that? Any thoughts?
I think that's also one of the solutions that David Graeber gives for the bullshit.
Really?
For the bullshit jobs, and he believed strongly in that. I do not know actually what to think of it. I'm a bit skeptical. That I think it's a bit too naive. That there's too much dirty work out there that people don't want to do. Yeah, but I do not know this, of course. Yeah, it's my hinge.
Then it's about money.
I'm afraid so. Yeah.
Anyone? Any thoughts? Hey, I am gonna throw.
It's nice.
Nice. My question is more about your methodology. So if you work in a donkey shelter, whether it's in the field or drinking coffee, do you ask specific questions to retract information, or do you just observe and stay back?
That's a good question. It depends a bit. So what you do is the first session, you tell them that you're an ethnographer, an anthropologist, and that you're going to join them for a while. So the people who are there, they know that you are conducting research. But there's a paradox in anthropology itself, because you aim to let people forget that, which is kind of strange, right? Because there's this ethic idea that you let everyone know that you're doing research. But then on the other hand, the idea of staying there very long is that you sort of make them forget, right? So sometimes you ask questions that are very relevant for your research. Sometimes you sit there and you say nothing. Also depends on yourself, how you're feeling that day. But the idea, of course, is that you stay there so long, for 1.5 years, that you sort of emerge with the people that are there. Yeah. Yep.
You could just toss it around. There.
Sorry. Thank you. So your hypothesis is that dirty work provides a perspective on a level of meaningfulness, right? Would you go so far as to say that work that doesn't involve dirty work has less potential to be perceived as meaningful by the employee themselves?
Nice question, but I wouldn't go as far, no. No, I would just say that dirt is a nice way to study how meaningfulness is negotiated. And if there's no dirt in a job, which I doubt, if there is a job that has no dirt, maybe you have an example, but I'm... Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah, but I think it's just a nice entry point to study how meaningfulness at that particular organization or that particular workflow is negotiated among people. Because dirt, because of this ambivalent relationship between dirt and meaningfulness, that comes back again and again at the donkey shelter. And after September, I'm going to do a similar project in a slaughterhouse. And the first insights there, they also point at this relationship that people tend to forget or sort of marginalize dirt. But if you actually focus on dirt and what people think of it, how they treat it, and how people think differently, it says a lot about the organizational culture and meaningfulness at that place. Yeah.
And a follow-up question. If your work consists of too much dirt, or no, I will rephrase it. Is there a point at which there's so much dirt in your job that all meaning disappears by the employee themselves?
Good question again. Well, there is an example of two scholars who did research among refuse collectors, so garbage people, and they had this story that, okay, we clean to serve society, right? We do the dirty work, we do it. But sometimes the dirt was so omnipresent, and they couldn't shower it away. And I would say that would be an example that the dirt is just too, it's just too material to actually transform it into something meaningful. Yeah?
Yeah, nice.
Thanks for the questions, by the way, all of you.
Do you think that we can, in any way or other, get rid of this dirty work in future? And which would be the disadvantages of that?
I think that there's dirt in almost every job. So then it's going to be very difficult to get rid of it, right? Because then you're asking me, can we get rid of work? I would love to. No, I don't think so, no. I do think that we can try to reduce the amount of engagement that we have with physical dirt, for instance, right? Because of robots or whatever kind of technological advance. But I think for instance, there's more and more moral ambiguity on the other hand, right? That takes sort of the place. Like, how far can we actually let machines do stuff in terms of when it's still morally responsible to do so?
And did you notice any pride with the workers doing their job, even if it's very dirty? I can imagine that they are proud of the role that they fulfill for society.
Yeah, that's his badge of honor.
Okay.
Yeah, and I also felt that myself. I always highlight this example of the fence, right, that I made, because I never, it's horrible. But also when I, clean the stables or stuff like that, you feel a certain pride. And I think this also relates maybe to this kind of physicality that is part of the work. But this is, again, speculation. I do not know. But I did experience a lot of satisfaction, I would say, for doing the dirty work, yeah.
In the donkey shelter, it was volunteering work, but in the slaughterhouse, it will be paid work. What differences do you expect to find?
For some people, it was paid work at the donkey, but most of them voluntary, yeah. I think, or at least also the first findings, because I've read some interviews, is that they don't consider other options. Many people working there are also from other countries, and they have no choice. They have to work there because there's just no plan B.
Yeah.
And then this whole question of meaningfulness in work gets a totally different issue, right? Then it's suddenly all about privilege, and why are we even thinking about meaningfulness in work? Because, you just have to work. Yeah. But then again, they also had this kind of, I can imagine there's also this kind of pride. Like, okay, I can stand this. We have one colleague in the project team who visited the place and who can't eat bacon anymore. He just can't. The smell is so... Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks, Jelle. I was wondering, when you define meaningful work, or actually as the opposite of bullshit jobs, it's a cognitive thing, right? Whether you feel it's meaningful or no. I'm saying it wrongly. Whether you think it's meaningful or can explain to someone else or to yourself whether it's meaningful. And I know you are a lot thinking about the embodied part of meaning and the feeling that people experiences. And I wondered, in this donkey shelter, have you got like examples of how people then express meaning without saying, well, it's meaningful? Do you see what I mean?
That's a very good question. I think this theoretical concept of events of significance helps here, as it helps to focus on things that are not cognitive, right? So you can focus on feelings of affect that people have. But to give an example, I think laughter can say a lot. Or body language can say a lot. Tim climbing down a mountain of shit, who is really proud of himself being capable of dealing with the stench. I think the interns who looked disgusted upon us moving the donkey in a very awkward way. these are all related to perhaps not meaningfulness, but the opposite. Yeah. So yeah, I think it's possible, but you need to watch a lot, and observe, and it's very subjective, and also very tricky, because then what you're gonna do, what you want to try to do, is to ask the people, okay, I observed this. Do you think it's correct to make my assumption that it was about meaningfulness? But then the moment is away, right? Probably it's a couple of days ago.
And they will, like,
exactly.
put it in words.
Yeah.
And the whole feeling thing is...
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's difficult, yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
Oh, geef maar, ik gooi hem daar gewoon. Heel ver weg.
Yeah, so you have to come this far.
No worries.
Yeah, I'm going to stand. I want to stretch a bit. Thank you, Jelle, for the presentation. So it is well known that people get their identity from work. So like if you look in many cultures, let's say if you take like the English culture or the British culture, like even in the names people have, you have names like Smith, because people were blacksmiths, ironsmiths, and then they names like farmer, names like baker. So I was asking because we know that people get their identity from work. Like work gives them an identity, and I was thinking about the example with the bank
employees, yeah.
Yeah, and I was wondering, is it possible that they have this identity as bank workers or bank, and that identity prevented them from doing like what they had to do? Is it possible that the work we do gives us an identity, and it affects the way we even look at the world? And also, what other reasons could be for the bank? Bank what again?
Employees.
The bank employees, yeah. The bank employees not doing the work as they were expected to. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a nice question. Two things. First of all, I think it is that work is identity. It is a kind of changing thing. I think previously it was clearly the case that you were a blacksmith, but nowadays I'm an academic, but I'm also a chess player, and I'm also a father, and I'm also. So I think in our contemporary society we have the luxury of becoming a bit more picky in our identity choices. So in that way, I think the picture is changing somewhat. Yet I do agree that our profession constitutes a key feature of how we move, how we see, how we think. There's this notion of habitus, which really captures that. So the academic habitus is looking upstairs, looking from front like this, right? Like you're thinking, looking smart. And every kind of profession has this kind of typical kind of behavior. And I think the bankers had exactly the same kind of thing that I experienced when I came there the first time. So we are used to do work with, sitting at a desk, thinking a lot, right? And then suddenly having to deal with the everyday materiality of the donkey shelter is a very different piece of cake. So that requires adaptation, and I think that takes time. And even if I were at the donkey farm for like 10 years, I still wouldn't be, a full donkey shelter caretaker. I just don't have the, I've been trained in different cultures. Yeah. And I think for many people of the bank would be the same story. Yeah.
Magic.
Hi, has this work changed your perspective on your job as an academic? And maybe whether you shared it with colleagues? I was curious about.
That's a very nice question too. Yes, this work does change. It sheds a huge new light on working, of sitting behind a desk. That's one key thing, right? Because at the donkey shelter, I never sit. I work all except for the coffee drinking, of course, which you now know, 1 hour a day. So that's, but also the way people know each other is very different than the kind of setting that I'm used to. And in my own work, I try to do that a bit differently now. I want to adapt integrate some of the lessons I learned there. get a bit closer to the people I work with, right? We are all very busy, and I try to stop that a bit.
Identify your own dirty work?
Yes, I think so. It's funny, because at academia it's even more tricky, because there you have the professor, right? You have the associate professor, you have the assistant professor. So there's a clear-cut hierarchy, and yet we pretend it's not there. But there's all kind of, subtle ways that it becomes clear that there are hierarchies and that someone's doing the dirty work. Right? So, for instance, if you organize something, last year I organized a congress, and then I really try to think, it's kind of a habit now that I think, okay, what in this particular event is going to be the dirty work? That's going to constitute going to be getting the flowers, right, for the speakers. That's something that you always forget, and that someone has to do at the final stage of the event, and then that's always the person who is lowest in the hierarchy. Well, not always, but often. And then I thought, okay, I'm going to avoid that, and I'm going to do the flowers, stuff like that. Yeah. I think it's very helpful to think about the dirty work in what you're going to do, and who is, without you interfering, who's going to do that dirty work. Yeah. Maybe, yeah.
So David Graeber makes it up to the worker to distinguish whether a job is a bullshit job or not, which now makes you the expert to determine whether working at the donkey shelter is more or less meaningful than your work as an academic.
That's nice.
Which is a bit of a harsh question, I know, but just to also highlight the implication of the definition that Graeber also uses.
Yeah, a very nice question. I think it's a very important question for academics. But I think one of the reasons I'm here now at this evening is to not have a bullshit job. Right? The way I get here, I don't get paid to be here this evening or something like that. But I just like to make sure that whatever I'm studying all the time in my room, that it also gets at the people who, at other people who can also profit from that kind of knowledge. So there is a pitfall, I would say, in academia to let it become a bullshit job. For instance, if you choose topics that are that require translation before them to get relevant for many people. I think for work it's pretty easy, because almost all of us work. So then it's very easy to make it relevant. But if you're studying something else, I think you have to go the extra mile to make sure that other people are also benefiting from that kind of knowledge that you're producing. Yeah. But for me it's easy. I don't think I have a bullshit job. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you for your wonderful speech, lecture. Many organizations appoint a chief happiness officer these days. Would you say there should also be a chief dirty work officer?
So what was the first chief? The
chief happiness officer.
Chief happiness officer. Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, that's good.
CHO.
It would be very good to have a chief. Yes, very good recommendation, I think. Yeah. Yes. There's going to be a lot of people who are very angry with that, I think, if you install a dirty work expert who's focusing on all the dirty work. Because it's going to imply that the people higher up, at least that's what I think, it's going to imply that a lot of people higher up in the chain, that they're going to do a lot of stuff that they don't think is important. So the best paid people are going to do jobs that they think, I can do something better, I'm more important. So it's going to be a very confronting experience, I think, and I'm totally in favor of it, yeah. Please become one. Sorry?
We will be hiring soon.
Yeah, nice.
One last question, and then we'll wrap it up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. One final question from my point of view is, I worked in Malta a couple of years ago and had to deal with, from university, with the gaming industry. Huh? So, generally speaking, would you consider crime, in general, and gaming industry as dirty work?
Crime and gaming industry.
And gaming industry. So in the gaming industry, it is for instance, one of the effects is that people lose their job, lose their family,
Yeah.
they have so many debts. So would you in general say that, in general, crime, and one specific example, gaming industry, is a form of dirty work?
Well, I have an easy way out here, I think, because dirty work is dirty if a large part of society considers it to be dirty. I don't know any research on this issue, but maybe, yeah. I don't have enough knowledge to specify my own position here. No. Well, crime does seem like morally questionable, so yeah. Right? Yeah. So, yeah.
With that, I want to thank you, Jelle, for taking the time, spending time with us in your free evening. He has to travel back all the way to Bilthoven tonight, so mind you. And thank you all for participating so vividly and for your questions. And I really liked how you took your way into this language, with this lecture by, basically your way of work, which is great. Just telling about how the life at the donkey care. What is it? Donkey
Caretakers.
shelter is, yeah. So with that, thanks a lot. Thank you all. And
thank you, everyone. Yeah.
Hopefully we'll see you back.
Ah, dat is aardig.